Governing the ungovernable. The incomes of the top 1% of the population in the US after adjusting for inflation rose by 275% between 1979 to 2007. Those of the middle class by only 21% and the poor class a mere 11%. The minuscule group, the top 1%, earns about a sixth of total income, and the top 10% earn as much as half of it. The median household income in the US, adjusted for inflation, fell 6.7% and was lower in 2009 in comparison to 1997. The top 1% in the US owns as much wealth as 90% of the population. George Packer notes the more wealth accumulates in a few hands at the more influence and favor the well-connected rich acquire, which makes it easier for them and their political allies to cast off restraint without paying a social price. That in turn frees them to amass new money. 58% of economic growth in the US over a 30-year period was captured by this tiny group. The IRS reported in 2007 that the top 0.01% of taxpayers had a combined income of $1 trillion. In Europe, austerity measures in the peripheral countries resulted in cuts in public expenditure, layoffs, retrenchments, a salary freeze, and rising youth unemployment, all adversely affecting those at the bottom of the income distribution scale. The majority of the population is suffering from weak. At the same time, the chief executives of large firms took home 250 times as much as their average worker has against a differential of 20 to 30 times in 1970. The number of millionaires and billionaires is expanding at an unprecedented pace in all parts of the world. Even in a country such as India, which has a third of its population living below the poverty line. The Arab Spring is demonstration of the disenchantment of the educated and unemployed with the rapacious lifestyles of the elite. The repression by the state to maintain the status quo, and the inability of the Arab states to generate productive jobs. The backlash against globalization, trade, immigration, and the flood of refugees entering Europe and the US, and the rise of nationalist parties is also a manifestation of the same phenomena. Whether it is the modes where it is the monarchs, dictators, and elected leaders becoming rich, or highly paid bankers, or big multinationals avoiding payment of their fair share of taxes. The disaffected are using the power of the social networks and the instantaneous communication they offer to coalesce and shake up the entrenched vested interests. The rage and fury of these disenchanted colossus is spilling across national boundaries. Contagion is no longer confined to the international financial system but is equally applicable to social movements. There is ample evidence to demonstrate a correlation between elitist capture of economy and politics, which is apparent from concentration of income and the pace of economic development and political stability. Mancur Olson has argued that nations decline because of the lobbying power of distributional coalitions or special interests groups whose growing influence fosters economic inefficiency and inequality. Jonathan Ostray and Andrew Berg believe that inequality makes an important difference to the level of economic growth, such that more unequal societies have slower and more fragile economic growth. Deep inequality breeds resentment and political instability and discourages investment. It can lead to political polarization and gridlock as it sleeves the political system between the interests of the rich and the poor. It can make it more difficult for governments to deal with brewing crises and economic imbalances. Growth is faster in more equal societies than in those that are less equal, regardless of whether they have redistributive tax systems. Inequality strongly correlates with a spell of economic expansion and thus less growth over time. For emerging and developing economics, inequality might foster political instability and lead to violence and economic destruction. Analysis of the factors contributing to this rising income inequality have sparked heated debate among scholars as well as policymakers and the popular media. Martin Wolf attributes this to globalization, technological changes, and winner takes all markets. Others believe that globalization contributes to inequality by creating a global labor pool that holds down wages while boosting corporate profits. Nigel Lawson is of the view that when businesses are considered too big, too important, or too interconnected, the crucial discipline of the marketplace disappears and disaster is almost inevitable. What can possibly be done to cope with this phenomena of growing inequality and elitist capture? Does this phenomena arise due to malfunctioning of markets? New institutional economics has advanced economic theories that identify institutional capabilities that states needed to make the markets function efficiently. Douglas North defines institutions as humanly devised constraints that structure political, the economic, and social interactions and they include the laws, rules, customs, and norms constructed to advance and preserve social order. In regard to the link of institutions to economic development, his view is how do we account for poverty in the midst of plenty? We must create incentives for people to invest in more efficient technology, increase their skills, and organize efficient markets. Such incentives are embodied in institutions. Duran, Acemoglu, and Robinson in their study Why Nations Fail demonstrate that it is institutions that determine the fate of nations. Success comes when political and economic institutions are inclusive and pluralistic, creating incentives for everyone to invest in the future. Nations fail when institutions are extractive, protecting the political and economic power of only a small elite that extracts income from everyone else. Institutions that promote good governance and facilitate broad based and inclusive growth enjoy pride of place in development strategy. According to Acemoglu and Johnson, good institutions ensure to desirable outcomes. They provide relatively equal access to economic opportunity, a level playing field, and appropriately reward those who provide labor and protect their property rights and protect their property rights. Among the components of good governance, human capital is considered one of the factors that is associated with both economic growth and equity. In a study on human capital and economic growth, the authors, using the date for the 1996 to 2011 period for 134 countries, found strong evidence in support of the hypothesis that the relationship between human capital and economic growth is much less pronounced in countries with a low quality of governance. Preconditions in the form of good governance are necessary for an educated labor force to contribute to the economic growth of a country. Weak governance, indicated by inadequate law and order, corruption, and maladministration, result in inefficient utilization of human resources.